Okay, good. Before I start, let me offer a disclaimer. When I give these talks, I hope you all don't think these are just all ideas that come out of my head, because trust me, they don't. But I've read a lot, Eknath Eswaran with the Dhammapada interpretation is very good, and also I was reading some Bhikkhu Bodhi, because when I know I'm going to do one of these talks, I kind of start reading a week or two before and looking for some ideas. So I read some of this stuff, and I take some notes, and I took notes from Bhikkhu Bodhi, and then I don't give them the credit for what I'm writing down in the notes, and then when I come to put it in the talk, I don't know what the notes, who they were from. So whatever I say today is either from Eknath Eswaran or from Bhikkhu Bodhi. So if there's problems with it, talk to them. I want to start off with a reading, so if you'll put your hands in hop, Sean. This is chapter 20 of the Dhammapada. Of paths, the eightfold is the best. Of truths, the noble four are the best. Of mental states, detachment is the best. Of human beings, the illumined one is the best. This is the path. There is no other that leads to the purification of the mind. Follow this path and conquer Mara. This is the path. There is no other that leads to the purification of the mind. This path will lead to the end of suffering. This is the path I made known after the arrows of sorrow fell away. All the effort must be made by you, the Buddha said. The Buddha only shows the way. Follow this path and practice meditation. Go beyond the power of Mara. All created things are transitory. Those who realize this are freed from suffering. This is the path that leads to pure wisdom. All created beings are involved in sorrow. Those who realize this are freed from suffering. This is the path that leads to pure wisdom. All states are without self. Those who realize this are freed from suffering. This is the path that leads to pure wisdom. Now is the time to wake up, when you are young and strong. Those who wait and waver with a weak will and divided mind will never find the way to pure wisdom. Guard your thoughts, your words, your deeds. These three disciplines will speed you along the path to pure wisdom. Meditation brings wisdom. Lack of meditation leaves ignorance. Know well what leads you forward and what holds you back, and choose the path that leads to wisdom. Cut down the whole forest of selfish desires, not just one tree only. Cut down the whole forest, and you will be on your way to liberation. If there is any trace of lust in your mind, you are bound to life like a suckling calf to its mother. Pull out every selfish desire as you would an autumn lotus with your hand. Follow the path to nirvana with a guide who knows the way. I will make this my winter home, have another home for the monsoon, and dwell in a third during the summer. Lost in such fancies, one forgets his final destination. Death comes and carries off a man absorbed in his family and his possessions as the monsoon flood sweeps away a sleeping village. Neither children nor parents can rescue one from death once death has seized. Remember this and follow without delay the path that leads to nirvana. Thus ends the reading. I read that, I thought, wow, this is really, I've read it before, and sometimes it sticks out more, but I read that part. It says, if there's any trace of lust in your mind, you are bound to life like a suckling calf to its mother. I thought, oh, crap. I'm working on it. So we'll deal with that at a later date. So I'm talking about right view today. The spiritual path, the search for the spiritual path is to end suffering. We have been given a path to follow by the Buddha, and this is the Noble Eightfold Path, and we're all familiar with that. Now, a couple of years back, actually quite a while, maybe 6-7 years back, there was a woman who was attending here, and all of a sudden one day, after a while, she wasn't attending anymore, and somebody, I forget who it was, it may have been you, asked her, called her up and said, well, we haven't seen you for a while, is everything okay? And she said, oh yeah, everything's fine, it's just I needed it because I was going through some real trouble, and I needed this place to come. But now I'm doing fine, so I don't need it anymore. And I thought, you just missed it. You know, you're almost there. The practice of focusing on and developing the Noble Eightfold Path was the Buddha's central teaching. Now, Eknath Esaran says that about the Noble Eightfold Path, that it can extinguish selfishness, which is one of the root causes of our suffering. To know that happiness cannot come from anything outside of ourselves, and that all things that come into being have to pass away, this is the right view, or the right understanding. It's the beginning of wisdom. The beginning of the path that leads to the end of suffering. Now, selfishness arises from concerns with our own welfare, at the disadvantage or at the disregard for others. As most of you know, I'm in a 12-step program, and one of the, years ago, 25 years ago, one of the old timers at the table I was at was saying, you know, look, if you want to be happy, think of others first. If you want to be miserable, focus on yourself. Think of yourself. And I think that that's pretty true. Now, Bhikkhu Bodhi said that the essence of the Buddha teaching can be summed up in two principles. The first factor is the Four Noble Truths. We all know that. The second factor is the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, the first, the Four Noble Truths, covers the side of doctrine. And then the primary response it elicits is understanding, if you understand it. And the second covers the side of discipline, the Noble Eightfold Path. It's discipline in its broadest sense. And the primary response it calls for is practice, meditation, practice. There's going to be a lot of that through this talk. It calls for action, not just for thinking. Now, Bhikkhu Bodhi also writes that the two principles include one another. And when they lock together in an individual unity, they result in the Dharma. When the two principles lock together and include one another, the path claims primacy, because it is precisely what brings the teachings to life. Further on, he says, whatever the explanation, the path remains far more important than the philosophy. Action is more important than the thinking. It is in the Buddha's estimation his foremost gift to mankind. Now, to follow the Noble Eightfold Path is a matter of practice rather than intellectual knowing. But to understand the path correctly, it has to be practiced and investigated. So your meditation is critical there. Right view, or right understanding, it can be either one, is the forerunner and the guide to all of the rest of the path. Right view is, first of all, the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. We start with the Four Noble Truths. But there's more to right view than just the Four Noble Truths, because the Four Noble Truths encompass a lot of things. But the Four Noble Truths are the bullseye. Right view also calls for the understanding of the three hallmarks of existence. You know, the no self, suffering, dukkha, and anicca. You know, so emptiness, karma, karmic fruition, the inherent suffering of the five aggregates, and the seven factors of awakening. All these are part of the right view. There are other things there, but again, the Four Noble Truths, that's the bullseye when we talk about the path. Now, right view conditions action. Now, the Buddha himself said that he sees no single factor so responsible for the arising of unwholesome states of mind as wrong view, and no factor so helpful for the arising of wholesome states of mind as right view. Right view is the forerunner of the entire path, the guide for all the other factors. It enables us to understand our starting point, our destination, and the successive landmarks to pass as our practice advances. Again, in the words of Bhikkhu Bodhi, we find three requirements for this teaching proposing to offer the true path for the end of suffering. First, it has to set forth a full and accurate picture of the range of suffering. Well, I think the Noble Eightfold, or the Four Noble Truths do that. Second, it must present a correct analysis of the causes of suffering. Again, the Four Noble Truths. And third, it must give a means to eradicate the cause of suffering. Again, the Four Noble Truths, the path, the Noble Eightfold Path. It sounds encompassing, and it is. It is the Four Noble Truths. The source of all of our suffering lies in our mind, lies in the mind. and it is erroneous to think that the body is the source of bondage. This is why the practice of self-mortification didn't work for the Buddha. Attempting to gain liberation by afflicting the body is like saying, the beatings will continue until the morale improves. Self-mortification and ending suffering are mutually exclusive. The same is true for pursuing and embracing sensual pleasures as the means to awaken. The mind catches sight of some possibility of pleasure, accepts it at face value, and the result is greed. The middle way is the answer. It's the practice. It is the path. To get rid of the suffering, you must rid yourself of defilements. That's what I struggle with. That's pretty hard stuff. It cannot be accomplished by an act of will, by wanting them to go away. If that were the case, I would have been enlightened years ago, because I've always wanted these defilements to go away, but they stay. They're persistent. We have to find out what the defilements depend upon, and see how it lies within our power to remove them, and to remove their support. The removal of the defilements is dependent upon actions again. It is not possible with thinking and conceptualization alone. I'm attempting to improve my health through exercise. Now, I've been investigating chair yoga. I'll talk to you about that this morning. I see how it works for some people, and I believe it can work for me. I've purchased a book on it. I've looked at it online. It hasn't worked for me yet, even though I've investigated it. I've conceptualized what chair yoga is, and I see how it works. The only thing missing, or maybe the most important thing missing, is my action of actually doing it. It's hard. You got to start sitting in the chair and moving. The Noble Eightfold Path is only realized through action, just like my exercise is only going to be realized through the chair yoga when I do it. Now, to arrive at the experiential realization of the truth, it is necessary to take up the practice of meditation. First, to strengthen the capacity of sustained concentration, then to develop insight. Insight arises by contemplating the five aggregates, the three hallmarks of existence, emptiness, the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. All of these we want to discern in terms of what they really mean. Right view and meditation are symbiotic. Why? Well, because meditation fosters concentration, and concentration is required to keep our minds from going on its merry way. Habitually going down the same rabbit holes without the discipline to rein in the thinking process. Your mind goes off on its own all the time. I shouldn't say yours does. I don't know that yours does. Mine goes off on its own all the time. But almost all of our thinking is really rethinking. We think the same thoughts over and over. 90% or more of the thinking that we do is just a repeat of thinking that we've already done. We repeat the same scripts in our heads over and over. Maybe with some minor variations, but habitual thinking is often tied closely to fabrication. And our mind fabricates stories that appear to be real to us. But they're based on our experiences, and our experiences are tainted by interpretation, our interpretation. Reality is not necessarily a part of much of our thinking. So how do we deal with all of this information, interpretation and experiences as we attempt to follow the path to end our suffering? Well, we do it through right action. Follow the path, right action. Through right effort, another of the path's elements. Through right meditation, right concentration, right speech, right livelihood, and right thinking. But it all depends first on right view to get everything started.